Hi everybody, this is Anne. I'm going to be unpacking a science standard for grade 1. I went ahead and got this standard from Arizona Department of Ed website, so it is the state standard for grade 1 science. I am going to be teaching in Arizona this upcoming fall, and I really like science, and I'm hoping to teach younger kiddos, so that's why I went ahead and picked this one. I also have my undergrad in biology and chemistry, so it's kind of fun to see what the little kiddos are doing when it comes to science. So uh, the way that it works, and I didn't understand this until I kind of got a little bit more in the nitty gritty, is that the standard is divided up into strands. There are 6 strands for grade 1 in Arizona. I'm just going to be picking apart the first one. The first one is called the inquiry process. So, strand 1 is inquiry process. Basically, what this means is that there are 4 concepts within this strand that students will be learning. And those 4 concepts are essentially the scientific method. So students are going to be gathering information, they're going to be hypothesizing, they're going to be analyzing, they're going to be able to communicate then those results and formulate conclusive, basically, statements. And again, I just thought, what the heck? Science is fun. I like the hands-on experiment. Who doesn't? Beats working in a workbook. So that's why I went ahead and picked science as the standard. Okay, so let's talk about the big idea. The inquiry process, as I mentioned, is from strand 1. Arizona Department of Ed says that this is the basis for students to be learning in science. So this is the foundation. We have to start with this strand before we can build on it and work our way up all the way up to 6, which is the last one. It states that students will use the scientific method throughout strand 1. And as mentioned before, the scientific method is broken down into concepts, or the strand is broken down into concepts. So concept 1 is observations, it is questioning, it is hypothesis. So we're going to start by teaching that. Then we move on to concept 2, which is the testing phase. So they're investigating and they're modeling. Concept 3 is analyzing the information that they got, as well as coming up with conclusive results. And then concept 4 within this strand is communicating the results appropriately to whomever. So that's kind of the big idea of this strand, the scientific method. We have to start there before we can make our way up to strand 6. Okay, so what are the skills? What are students supposed to be learning in strand 1? Under each concept, they have designated what they call performance objectives. I like the way that Arizona does it because they have italicized POs or performance objectives and then non-italicized POs. If it's italicized, that means that it is something that's being retaught, meaning we taught that as a new concept in the previous grade level, and now we're reteaching it at this grade level, just at a higher level of complexity. And then the POs that are non-italicized, those are just brand new concepts that we're teaching to students. So for example, let's take a look at concept 1. Concept 2 is scientific testing. So basically what they want students to learn in this concept is how to participate in investigations as well as record data appropriately and accurately. There are 2 performance objectives that are being retaught. The first one is that we want to demonstrate safety behaviors with conducting science experiments and then also using appropriate procedures. And then the second one is we want students to participate in gathering information, whether that's, life science, earth science, space, physical science. Then there are 2 POs that are brand new concepts. They want students to begin using tools to collect data. So this is things like rulers, magnifiers, thermometers. And then they also want students to start recording data. So having a lab notebook or a chart or some kind of log for them to be using. So those are the skills that in Strand 1, Concept 2, students will be learning. Okay, on to the fun stuff. What is the project that I'm going to do? I actually did this project when I was in school, and I don't know, just stuck in my brain. So I'm like, well, let's do it again. But basically, I want to teach buoyancy. So I'm looking at teaching students, how do you know if an object is going to float? or if it's going to sink. So I think what I want to do is get just like a tub of water, like a Rubbermaid tub of water, and maybe like 10 objects. And we all kind of, they'll sit, I'm assuming, just in front of me, like on the rug, and I'll sit in front and I'll say, okay, do you think that this object is going to sink, or is this object going to float? And we'll kind of go through all of that. So let me break it down. So concept one in strand one is for students to hypothesize. So what I want them to do before I even do the experiment is to say, hey, look, I have this object. I'm going to put this in the water. Do you think it's going to float, or do you think it's going to sink? And have the students answer that question maybe by raising their hand or some kind of full group discussion. And I may say why, right? And ask them why they think it's going to float or if it's going to sink. Concept two is just doing the testing. So then I say, okay, well, let's see. And I'll put the object in the water and they can see if it floated to the top or if it sunk to the bottom. The concept three is to record the data and to analyze and conclude. So what I want to do is they will each have a log in front of them, or like a worksheet with all 10 objects, and they have to circle either float or sink on there. So essentially we are having them use the new concept of using some kind of record-keeping log. So we're going to use a chart, and they will circle on there what sunk and what float. And then concept four is where they communicate then their results. So as a whole class, we may say, I may start asking questions. How many objects sunk? And they can look on their worksheet and they can count and they can hold up, on their finger 4 of them or whatever. Somebody can answer. Or I might ask them other questions just to have them communicate the results back to me and just make sure everybody's on the same page. So hopefully that'll be a fun little experiment, and who knows, maybe it'll be raining that day and they'll go out for recess and do the same thing with a bunch of, objects they find outside. That's at least what I did. All right, finally, how am I going to assess to make sure that students are understanding the concept of buoyancy? I know assessments are really important and I believe in them 100%. So I'm going to have a pre-assessment set up. So when they're all kind of sitting on the carpet in front of me, I may just ask them open-ended questions. Does anybody know what it means when an object sinks? What does that mean? Why does something sink? And then ask them, why does something float? What does that mean? Can you name some objects that float, or can you name some objects that sink? And then to also track kind of progress, they will be having a chart that they have to complete during the actual experiment that they turn in. So I can take a look at an individual level and see who really kind of understood that concept or not. Post-assessment I'll do I kind of talked about it just for concept 4, having them communicate back results, but asking them questions. So what objects did float? What objects did sink? Do you remember why objects sink or why objects float? And then what I'm thinking is, just for a reteaching kind of repetition, is at the end of the day, ask some questions just as a follow-up, kind of another post-assessment, if you will. Hey guys, remember when we did our science experiment today? What does it mean when something floats? What does it mean when something sinks? What were the objects that floated up to the top? Those kind of questions too. So that's what I'm planning on doing for assessing their level of understanding.